Hi, I'm Stacy, and this is Practical ESL. So today I want to talk about something that's really, really important, and maybe one of the things that I think is most important in the classroom. But I'll probably say that with everything. So take it with a grain of salt. But I will tell you a story. The other day, I went to a classroom to visit a teacher, and I really loved this teacher. And she was so sad because her students had just finished a type of assessment. It was a small assessment to look at, like, maybe it was, you could compare it to a little lesson assessment or a unit assessment. And so when she got the results back from her students, she found that they really had not done well, and she was very sad. And I was sad for her. But at the same time, I wondered, like, didn't you know how your students would do on that test? And so the question is, can we know how our students will do on a test? And that's what I want us to look at today. So I'm going to share my screen with you. And there's something that some people might call formative assessment, but I think when we think about formative assessment, we think of big things. So I also want us to think about something called MRS techniques, or MRS is like multiple response strategies. So I want us to think about those. Before we do, let me just ask you a question. How do you feel about testing? Is there a type of testing you prefer? What would happen if there were no testing? I'm just going to stop here for just a minute because I don't like testing. And personally, I wish that there was no testing. I guess out of any kind of testing, I like the quick ones inside my class that help me to know where my students are at and if they understood. When I think about what would happen if there were no testing, I think most of our districts don't set out to give us a bunch of things that don't matter. I think testing comes from a good place of wanting all of our kids, wanting to know that our kids mastered what they were supposed to, the information they were supposed to master before they move on to the next thing. And I think that is good. The way that it plays out in the classroom is often not so good. But if there were no testing, would the teachers work as hard? Would the students work as hard? I don't know. But what I can tell you is that there are different types of testing. So we have summative assessment, and that is what most of us know in the classroom. We have I live in Texas, so in Texas, we have the STAR. In other places, there are Common Core tests. So you have these summative assessments that, like, every district has, and they're your state testing, your government testing, those type of things. So then we have formative assessment, and this is often smaller, but maybe it happens at the end of your class, or maybe it happens at the end of a week, or however you do it in your classroom. I think of formative assessment as those many things that are happening inside your lesson. But some people would call that multiple response strategies. And again, I don't care what we want to call it. For the sake of today, maybe we're going to call it multiple response strategies, just so that we don't confuse it. I know that in a lot of our districts, we talk about DOLs or power DOLs, and those are going to be at the end of something. And what I want you to know is that you can know how your students are going to do on that before you get there. So whatever plan you have for the end of your lesson to find out how your students did, it's kind of the same as your summative assessment. Once your students have taken that test, you can't go back. So on a summative assessment that would be like the STAR, an end of the year exam, then you can only change what you're going to do next year. The problem is our students need us to change during the lesson. If our students aren't understanding what we're teaching, then what is the point of continuing in that same pattern? Instead, we want to change in the lesson, and we want to make our lesson applicable for our students in that moment. And so that is what formative assessment, it can form to what we need for our students. That's what we want it to do. So as we keep going, I'm going to just give you kind of a lesson that I might teach in my classroom. Let's say that I'm teaching a lesson on word denotations and connotations. So this is my student learning objective. At the end of this unit, students will be able to identify the difference between denotations and connotations and apply them to answer questions from our text. So my text is, I don't know if any of you have ever used the True Stories by Sandra Heyer. They are my favorite stories for ESL students. So I taught ESL kids in the classroom. They were newcomer students. They didn't have much English. And you can't see this because I have a Zoom background, but I would use these stories because they are short texts. They are informational texts, but they are super high interest. And so my students loved them. So I picked one from this book and it was called Dish Soap for Dinner. And so it's so funny because this guy gets a package in the mail and it's dish soap, but he doesn't know that because he sees this picture of a lemon on it and he thinks that it's salad dressing and he puts it on his salad. He gets super sick. And then he has to go to the hospital and he finds out there are other people who went to the hospital too because they received this dish soap in the mail and they all thought it was salad dressing. So it's very funny. My kids loved it. It's a super short text. And so I took that. And again, I said, in Texas, we have the STAR. And so the STAR has questions that we need to answer about connotations and denotations. And I modeled questions for this text based on how those connotation and denotation questions look like in the STAR. So my text was dish soap for dinner. These would be some of my questions. And I'm just going to repeat, I'm going to come back to these at the end. So before I ask my students these questions, I want to build some background about connotations, and I want to find out what my students already know about connotations. So I might do something like this. I might tell them denotation is the dictionary meaning or the definition that we find in a dictionary. For example, yesterday's workout was a challenge. This is the denotation, the meaning or the definition of challenge. So here it is in a picture. You can see it like a dictionary format so they can know that a denotation is the dictionary meaning. And I want them to connect that denotation dictionary. And whenever they see the word meaning in a question on a test, I want them to know that they have to use their dictionary and find out the dictionary meaning. Connotation is the feelings that we get from a word, how that word makes us feel. So for example, I can say yesterday's workout was a challenge, or I could say yesterday's workout was very difficult. Those are two different things. Both of them have a similar denotation. So here's the denotation, here's the dictionary definition for each of them. But which one has a positive connotation? Yesterday's workout was a challenge, or yesterday's workout was very difficult. At this point, I might do a quick formative assessment or MRS strategy to find out how well my students are understanding. I could do a stop and write. So I might ask all of my students to stop and write down one thing they understand about denotations. What could that be? Hopefully they're going to say denotations are the dictionary definition. I might ask my students to stop and write down one thing they understood about connotations. Hopefully they would say something like connotations have to do with feelings. I might ask them to stop and write down one word they already know that has a positive connotation, which would be, if we go back, challenge, because difficult has the negative connotation and challenge has the positive connotation. So then I'm going to continue. He lived in an old house in the woods. He lived in an old shack in the woods. What word is different in these sentences? So we're going to look up the definition of house and shack. Then I'm going to have a little picture definition for them. And then I'm going to ask them, do house and shack have a similar denotation?